Florida, you'll always be my home, forever in my heart, no matter where.
My name is Ron Peak. I'm commander of the Indian River Camp 47 Confederate Sons Association. We're a historical group. We do living histories for schools and public locations and events like the event here today at Sam's house. We also have reenactors where we go to battlegrounds and we reenact participating in battle scenes between Confederate and Federal forces. In my personal role in it is I'm a native Floridian. My family settled Florida before it was a state. Settled in 1835 before the Second Seminole War started. My great-grandfather moved into Alachua County, southeast corner of Alachua County on the eastern shore of Loch Loosa Lake. He signed the Armed Occupation Act of 1840, in which he had to live on the property for 5 years with a family and dwellings in order to claim a homestead. He did that in 1835, and he lived on it for 5 years. Florida became a state in 1840, which is the end of his 5 years, and he claimed 160 acres. I have the records for the 160 acres. It's on the southeastern shore of Lake Loch Loosa in southeast Alachua County. There was an archaeological dig on the property. I have a 2-inch segment of my great-grandfather's pipe since he was a Scot. He came into the Civil War with the Florida 9th Infantry over in Orange Springs. He had a younger brother, and I had 2 ancestors out of the Tompkins family, which is my ancestry on my grandmother's side, that fought in the Florida 9th Infantry. They fought at the Battle of Olustee, which takes place this weekend and up at Lake City, east of Lake City. And I know where my great-grandfather was at. I also know where some of the other members of the Tompkins family was at. I portray one of the Tompkins brothers. I know he was standing on the railroad just outside the main entrance to Olustee, in which a cannonball, a federal cannonball, fell at his feet. Didn't go off. He later recovered it, and it stayed at my Aunt Bee's house in Loch Loosa, Florida. And there was 3 generations of us kids that played with it. Fortunately, it was a dud. It was later on neutralized, and is one of my camp members here is you're my second lieutenant.
Second lieutenant commander.
Second lieutenant commander, and I'd like to give him some time to talk a little bit about. He's infantry. I'm artillery. Artillery is trimmed in red. Infantry is trimmed in either a light blue or a dark blue, or maybe not any trim at all, because not all of the troops got proper uniforms when we went in. A lot of us were drafted in or went in and signed up, walked off the war, and we were issued rifles and horses. If we had horses, I had ancestry in cavalry, ancestry in infantry, but I do artillery because I have bad feet and I can do artillery pretty well. So Mike, why don't you tell them a little bit about yourself?
My name is Mike Tucker, and I'm the second lieutenant commander of this camp. I joined this camp because of I'm interested in history, and I'm also from southern lineage, Florida and Georgia, and near as I can tell, all of my great-great-grandfathers were Confederate soldiers. A sutler that lives in Central Florida who sells uniforms and gear. I told him who my great-great-grandfather from Lake City was, and I told him his name, and he says, well, if he was in the Florida 4th, he was probably wearing this uniform. He showed me some archive photos of the Florida National Guard of the era, and I said, well, that's my great-great-grandfather right there, and Lewis F. Gay, Corporal Lewis F. Gay of the Florida 4th, and he says, and it was he was wearing a jacket just like this, and he said that's a Richmond shell something other, and I had this jacket made on that pattern, and so I'm wearing my Florida 4th great-great-grandfather's jacket, but I came in like Ron. I don't do reenactments, but I do living histories and parades, and I enjoy it. I just enjoy the camaraderie, and what we do.
I might add, if I can have some more time here, I might add that when the Confederate troops defeated the Federals at Olustee, Lee called up the rest of the Confederate infantry up to the defense of Richmond. They went up and joined forces with the rest of the Floridians, which would have been his grandfather, great-grandfather. They were all put together. Now, the Florida troops were pretty good shots because we'd been fighting the Seminoles for some 30 years prior. So we joined forces there, and they joined it as a Florida battalion. The Florida troops that came out of Olustee in 1864 arrived at Richmond in time for Cold Harbor. Grant was trying to penetrate the defenses of Richmond. At Cold Harbor, it was a terrible defeat for him. He lost many lives. So he changed his tactic, and he ordered his troops to move south towards the southern city south of them. That was the supply route for Richmond. That was Petersburg. Petersburg eventually was sieged for 9 months before it finally fell. During the time that the Florida soldiers combined together in the Florida infantry, they were given instructions after Cold Harbor to make their way down Weldon's Railroad to the southern terminus before it went into North Carolina at Weldon's Railroad at a terminus, and I'll think of it as I'm talking. Anyway, they were ordered to make that trip south when they were traveling down the southern trip to Reams Station, and that's the location. They traveled between Confederate troops on their left. I'm sorry, they were going south. Confederate troops were on their right, Federal troops on their left. They traveled in between those two opposing armies to get to the southern terminus there at Reams Station. Now, they all made it down there. There was some wounded men by the time they got there, but Reams Station is where they actually made their final stand. My wife, when she was alive, we made a trip up there. I put into that location, and I wound up camping about maybe 5 miles from the battleground. I actually recovered some Florida bullets. They're different than Federal bullets, and they're on my table over there. They are unfired. They came from Reams Station. That was where the Florida troops were at, and they're different from the Federal bullets. So, and we camp and live like they did back then. So we have a healthy respect for how tough our ancestors were.
You'll always be my home. I can feel Florida, you'll always be my home. Forever in my heart, no matter